airstrike in Baghdad that killed Iran's most powerful military leader. Speaking at his Florida Gulf resort today, Trump said Iranian General Qasem Soleimani was responsible for the deaths of American service members in the Middle East. Trump also said the general was plotting imminent and sinister attacks.
Soleimani made the death of innocent people his sick passion, contributing to terrorist plots as far away as New Delhi and London. Today we remember and honor the victims of Soleimani's many atrocities, and we take comfort in knowing that his reign of terror is over.
The Pentagon says it's preparing to send thousands of additional U.S. troops to the Middle East. American forces are expected to be deployed within the next 2 days. Republican Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell is praising the decision to target Iran's top general. But NPR's Kelsey Snell reports congressional Democrats are raising concerns about President Trump's authority to order the attack.
McConnell says Soleimani posed an ongoing threat to American lives and interests. In a speech on the Senate floor, McConnell was clear about his assessment of Soleimani's role.
This morning, Iran's master terrorist dead.
McConnell said staff is being briefed on the operation, and a classified briefing will be arranged for senators. Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer said nobody should shed a tear over Soleimani's death, but he questioned Trump's legal basis for the strike.
It is my view that the president does not have the authority for a war with Iran.
Schumer says Trump must ask for congressional approval if he intends to extend the conflict. Kelsey Snell, NPR News, the Capitol. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo says the U.S. is prepared for possible retaliation, including a cyber attack in response to the American airstrike in Baghdad. NPR's Pam Fessler reports officials are advising companies to pay special attention to threats against critical infrastructure.
Christopher Krebs, head of the Department of Homeland Security's cybersecurity agency, tweeted this morning that, quote, given recent developments, it's a good time for U.S. businesses to brush up on Iranian cyber threats. He said special attention should be paid to systems that control manufacturing facilities, oil refineries, and the energy grid. U.S. officials are also concerned about retaliatory attacks against American interests overseas, but a cyber attack is one way Iran could inflict serious damage inside the United States. Warnings were issued last year that Iranian hackers had stepped up efforts to find vulnerabilities in systems that control critical U.S. infrastructure. Pam Fessler, NPR News, Washington.
You're listening to NPR News in Washington.
Good afternoon. I'm Dave Heller, WHYY News. It's 4:04. Republican Party chairs in 2 of Delaware's 3 counties came under fire this week for comments made on Facebook. Newcastle County official who used an anti-gay slur on social media said he will resign. Chair Nellie Jordan was criticized for making anti-Semitic remarks. Vice Chair Jane Reddy says the committee will seek to remove Jordan's chief Reddy says their remarks do not reflect the party's views.
I don't engage in that rhetoric, and I don't think that people in Delaware expect their leaders to engage in that rhetoric. I think people would paint a broad brush, particularly individuals who get to inappropriate and I think they would acknowledge most people. It's not the entirety of the party.
The offensive remarks were condemned by Delaware's Democratic Party leaders. Protesters are expecting in Philadelphia to spend money on police and trash removal for the Mummers Parade. WHYY Citizen report.
The city of Philadelphia spent about $700,000 in services and overtime for the Mummers Parade. City Councilman-elect Jamie Gauthier said it would be better spent creating a new, more inclusive, multicultural tradition.
I think it's so exciting for the community that and create something really more inclusive and
Mummers attorney George Bates brave the subject of annual criticism because it spoofs the news of the year.
We need more dialogue, not less. You don't need to stuff things down. You need to open people's eyes. That's what needs to happen.
The Secretary organizers quickly disqualified the brigade that wore blackface this time. The brigade's leaders said the men will not be allowed to march in future parades. The says she'll speak with her colleagues on City Council to formulate an exact plan for next year. Tom McDonald, WHYY News.
Sixers beat the Rockets in Houston tonight. The evening forecast.
That's part of the Pentagon statement on the strike. Today, mourning in the streets of Tehran. And Secretary of State Mike Pompeo told CNN the U.S. is committed to de-escalation in the region.
President Trump's decision to remove Qasem Soleimani from the battlefield saved American lives. No doubt about that. He was actively plotting in the region to take actions, the big actions he described it, that would have put dozens, if not hundreds, of American lives at risk.
Democrats swiftly questioned the ramifications of the strike. Here's Senator Chris Murphy in an interview on Morning Edition today.
The worry here, of course, is that this is actually going to get more Americans, not less Americans killed. Is Qasem Soleimani more dangerous as a martyr than he was alive as the functional leader of the Quds Force? There will be reprisals.
And finally, in Florida this afternoon, President Trump addressed the nation about the strike.
We took action last night to stop a war. We did not take action to start a war.
Now we're going to bring in some of the NPR team covering this story since it broke last night. We have NPR's Tom Bowman, he covers the Pentagon, diplomatic correspondent Michelle Kellerman, and Franco Ordonez, who covers the White House. Welcome back. Hi.
Thank you.
Now,
Good to be here.
Franco, I want to start with you. What have we heard from the president beyond the comments just now?
Well, he said that Soleimani had an imminent and sinister plot to kill Americans, and that's why he had to order the strike. He did not favor regime change, the president said, but that he was always going to protect Americans serving overseas. He said the United States was ready to take further action, and even had some targets identified. He appeared to be, responding to criticism against the attacks, and the concerns that, as we heard from some of the Democrats, of potentially dragging the United States into another war.
Tom, I want to follow up on this idea of identified targets. The killing of Soleimani came after several days of tense back and forth in the region. Can you walk us through the events that led up to this final strike?
Well, first of all, Soleimani's been killing Americans for years, including U.S. soldiers in Iraq back more than 10 years ago by using these very powerful bombs called EFPs, or explosively formed penetrators, which could rip through the toughest armor. I was reporting there at the time, and soldiers and Marines were deathly afraid of him. And there's been talk over the years of targeting Soleimani. So why now? Because you have a more hardline administration, and U.S. officials say there were more and more rocket attacks on U.S. forces in Iraq, including one that caused the death of an American contractor in recent weeks. And there was compelling intelligence of more imminent attacks, according to Secretary of State Mike Pompeo and others, principally in Iraq, but also officials say possible attacks in Lebanon and Syria, so they decided to act. And Joint Chiefs Chairman General Mark Milley told reporters today some of the plots might still happen.
Franco, do we have a sense of how this decision was made?
Well, we're still pushing for a lot of those details. It was an option that was laid out earlier in the week. We know that from Senator Lindsey Graham, who was golfing with the president in Florida on Monday. They also met on Tuesday. But the groundwork was laid some time ago when the administration listed the IRGC as a terrorist organization back in April. That's something that had been rejected by previous administrations, including President George W. Bush and Barack Obama. Here's Colin Kahl, who was one of Obama's national security advisors.
What's interesting is that something changed in the equation inside the Trump administration. I don't know whether it came from the president himself or whether it was changed at the top of the Pentagon, but that calculation of kind of being risk-averse, which had, I think, deterred both the Bush administration and the Obama administration from taking out Soleimani, something has changed.
So previous White Houses had worried about escalating to war, and that carried over into the beginning of the Trump era. And that was at least till earlier this year.
And remind us at this point, who is on the national security team advising the president on this issue now?
Well, it used to be John Bolton. He was known for being a hawk on Iran. He was fired earlier this year. He's been replaced by Robert O'Brien. President Trump is also taking advice from Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, who has also been a steadfast hawk on Iran. He continues to be very involved, as we heard earlier today. He almost exclusively carried the administration message earlier today.
Michelle Kelly, can we talk about why Pompeo was out this morning talking about the attack, and he said that he hopes this attack will de-escalate the situation. What's the logic there?
Well, what he's hoping is that Iran will finally get a message that the U.S. is resolved to push back against Iran's bad behavior, which has been building up, as we've been hearing. One official quite confidently told us, quote, "We're now speaking in a language that the Iranian regime understands." But, Iran's supreme leader is vowing forceful revenge, and many diplomats are worried that this is actually going to escalate much further and that there's not really much of an off-ramp here. The Swiss ambassador to Iran, who represents U.S. interests there, was summoned to the foreign ministry. The ambassador, we're told, passed a message from the U.S. The Iranians say they've responded, but we don't really know what's in those messages. All we know is that there is at least an open channel.
And Pompeo, has he been on the phone with his counterparts as well?
Yeah, I mean, he's been talking to lots of foreign ministers all over the globe, in the region and Europe. The French and the British foreign ministers, after their phone calls, called for restraint. They're also talking about ways to keep the Iranian nuclear program in check, because remember, the U.S. left the Iran nuclear deal. There's also a lot of concern about what happens now in Iraq. Many there are furious that the U.S. took this action on Iraqi soil, and they are calling on the U.S. to leave. Administration officials point out that, a lot of Iraqis have been protesting recently against Iran's influence in the country and want the U.S. to stay. So diplomats are trying to work through all of this now, and Pompeo's been on the phone quite a bit.
In the meantime, how is the State Department bracing for a possible retaliation?
Well, embassies across the Middle East have been beefing up security and have also been issuing these security alerts, urging Americans to remain vigilant. In Iraq, for instance, the U.S. is actually telling Americans to leave any way they can. So we've been seeing these kind of alerts coming across the region from embassies.
Before I let you all go, what are your final thoughts? What are you going to be looking for over the next several hours and days? I want to start with you, Tom Bowman.
Well, possible retaliation from Iran against U.S. soldiers or diplomats in the region, particularly in Iraq. The Iranian leaders have promised forceful revenge, and also, as Michelle was alluding to, the Iraqi parliament. They will be debating whether U.S. forces should remain in the country. As she said, there's anger about the U.S. strikes that violated the country's sovereignty, they say.
Frank Ordonez from the White House, what should we be watching for?
Well, one thing that stood out to me listening to Trump was how he appeared to be kind of laying out his doctrine for when he would take military action. This has been a president who has campaigned and worked to pull Americans out of conflicts in the Middle East. This could frankly do the opposite. Michael Singh, who is the Middle East director in the George W. Bush administration, told me that perhaps Iran misread the United States and thought it lacked the stomach to get more involved.
And Michelle Kellerman, for you, you've been following the relationship between the U.S. and Iran for such a long time. What are you going to be looking for?
Yeah, I was struck by how confident the administration officials were today. They said that they can't say for sure that they've broken this cycle of violence, but that they don't think it'll be kind of, as this was the words of one, devilishly ingenuous as it was under Soleimani. So they really think that taking out Soleimani, that it won't be as an aggressive an Iran as we've seen before. But, that's not what most other experts in the region have been saying, and I think a lot of embassies are certainly